In this lesson, we'll talk in more depth about materials in ZBrush. So we talked a little bit about materials. Here is the eye that we created. We'll just use this as an example. Now right now, just as we had looked at the color before, whatever material we have selected is reflected on the eye. So we can see those surface qualities. If we want to change how we're viewing that, we can go into the materials. We can choose different kinds of materials to view that on our mesh. Okay, we have standard materials down here at the bottom, matte cap materials up here at the top, which will kind of enable you to get a more kind of realistic look. Kind of looks like particular things. So here we've got some clay that we have here. We've got some chrome, chalk, the familiar red wax, and we've got some more kind of shinier materials. And Pixelogic actually has a bunch of different matte caps, and there are ways to actually create your own as well that enable you to get different looks. So the key is that you are able to select a material and you can see it on your model, but it's not assigned to that yet. Okay, those pixels are not assigned with that material. And so what we can do is we could paint material on here. So we have the standard brush selected, and let's say we go to Chrome, and we've got material, the material channel on, RGB intensity, and I can paint through this. And then we'll go back to our basic material, and you can see I've now painted that material onto there. Okay. Come in here, and you can see the RGB intensity is 0. I can't paint that material, but if I go up in RGB intensity, I can paint that material on. Now the transition isn't very good between these two materials. There are ways to blend that edge a little bit better when we render it, but basically the polygons are being assigned either this material or that material, which creates that sharp edge. There's not really an in-between blending that happens, okay, as there would be with kind of color. So if we want to actually create or fill the entire object with a particular material, we would go in and select the material, and then we could go to color and fill that. And now anytime we select a different material, this chrome is still going to stay on our model until we fill it with something else. And so we no longer get that flexibility of working and jumping around to different materials, because we've now assigned this a particular material. Now the material itself, where it's looking for that material, is in this particular material slot. So if you start to make custom materials, just be aware that you want them to be in the same slot so that you can they can keep their assignments to whatever it is that you've actually assigned them to. So let's go back to our basic material, and I'm just going to fill the object with that basic material. And let's take a look at how we can start to modify our material. So I'm going to open up this tray on the left, and we've docked our material palette over here on the left hand side. And you can see this is our currently selected material in the upper left. Okay, you've got all these other materials you can select as well. Underneath that, you can see you have options here for manipulating these materials. So if we go under modifiers, there's a lot of different ways that we can start to manipulate this material. And most of these are common with some of the other materials. Some of the materials have their own, the matte cap materials kind of have their own way of working. But as far as the ambient goes, I can increase that. You can see it almost creates kind of a glow, but it's kind of an ambient light. The diffuse, you can see how that increases that diffuse amount, the brightness of that. I'm going to take that down as well. Okay, and we can also choose to change the curve on how that diffuse looks based on the surface. So if we kind of bring this up, we can change that and create some interesting effects where we've got darker areas in areas that are kind of facing us versus areas that are sort of facing away from us. So you could create kind of an inverted kind of look where the outer edges glow, or the kind of electron microscope look. Okay, I can go ahead and reset that back to normal. And that's on the diffuse. We can also change the specularity. So I can increase the specularity or shininess, which you can see affects the surface of the model. I can also increase the specular curve. So we can tighten up that spec by tightening that curve up. Or we can kind of broaden that out a little bit, take that specular highlight down. Okay, we can also change things like transparency and reflectivity. Some of these things won't necessarily show up too much until you render, and we'll talk about rendering a little bit later on. Okay, but you have a lot of different options in here for changing your materials. And once you modify that material, you can save off the material by just going to save, and you can save a copy of that. You can also copy it to another slot, and you can also load materials that you've previously saved or that you've downloaded from somewhere or someone's given to you. You can load those in here. If we take a look at a matte cap, just taking a look at this red clay, you can see it has some different options here, and you'll see down here there's an image that kind of is where that matte cap information is coming from. So it's kind of saying, okay, this is an area that's a highlight, this is an area that's kind of facing this direction, and this is facing this direction, and kind of calculates that from an image that you have and creates the matte cap material based on that. So there are different options in here that you can mess around with as well. The wax modifier will enable you to kind of get a subsurface kind of a look. So if I increase the strength, it's going to say, okay, there's another option that I have to turn on. That's going to be under our render palette. So under render properties, I'm going to turn on wax preview. You can see there's kind of a subsurfacey kind of a look there where if I increase that strength, you get kind of a glow or subsurface kind of a glow, and you can take your diffuse down a little bit, kind of make that maybe a little bit more apparent. Maybe take your specular up and increase the shininess a little bit. And you get almost kind of a skin type look starting to happen there with that wax preview. Okay, so your materials, you can access those up here. To change the modifiers, you can save out copies of materials that you've created and also load in materials that you've previously saved as well. Remember that if you fill your object with a particular material, if you want to go back and take away that material, you can add a new material just by filling it again. Or if you want to take away the assignment totally, you can use a plugin, and this is the Subtool Master plugin. And if you just open that up, it's under Z plugin, and you go to fill, it'll have options that you can use to fill your object with color and material, or both, just as we would with the regular tools. But if I unselect everything and hit OK, that's going to actually take away that assignment. So now if I change materials, it's going to actually go back to the way it was before, where any material that I have selected is reflected on the mesh. Okay, so now that we've talked about materials a little bit more, the next thing that I want to cover is working with textures. So there will be instances where we want to bring in textures for different things, and we kind of touched on this earlier. But we'll take a look at how we can do that, because it's kind of separated between how the textures are dealt with globally and then how the textures are dealt with on a subtool by subtool basis. And so we'll take a look at that in the next lesson.